In the sterile quiet of a suburban Chicago hospital room, Margaret Thompson, 72, overheard her son-in-law David's cruel whisper through a cracked door, "She's just dead weight." Her breaths, weak and tied to an oxygen mask, hitched under the sting of betrayal. Claire, her only daughter, stood silent, complicit. Each beat of the heart monitor ticked like a countdown on her time. But Margaret wasn't one to give in. With the grit of a woman who'd faced decades of hardship, she steeled herself. Backed by the kind-hearted nurse Tanya, Margaret hatched a plan that would shock her family and reshape her legacy forever. And the hospital room was a stark bubble of antiseptic smells and faint machine hums, weighed down by the scent of cleaning fluid and uneaten fruit cups on Margaret's tray. 3 days after lung surgery, her chest throbbed with every shallow breath, stitches tugging at her skin, the oxygen mask clouded with each exhale, a sign of her frailty, but also her fight. Propped on thin pillows, her silver hair splayed across crisp sheets. Her eyes were half shut, but alert, catching every sliver of light through the door's narrow gap. The world outside had shifted, and Margaret sensed it deep in her gut before her mind caught up. David's voice, cold and sharp, cut through her post-surgery fog. "She's got no savings left, nothing we can cash in till she's gone," he said, clipped like he was closing a deal, not talking about her life. Margaret's fingers twitched on the bedsheet, shock jolting through her exhaustion. Claire's silence screamed louder than any reply. She didn't push back, didn't stand up for her mom. The heart monitor's steady pulse mocked the turmoil in Margaret's chest. Each beep a reminder of time she wouldn't let slip away. David's words looped in her head, "She's just dead weight." She'd caught hints of it before. His snarky comments at holiday dinners, his eye rolls when she needed a ride to the doctor. But hearing it now while she lay exposed, hooked to tubes, hit harder than any surgical blade. Margaret stared at the ceiling, its plain tiles blurring as tears welled but didn't spill. She'd raised Claire solo after her husband passed, stretched a teacher's paycheck to cover braces and college, and led Sunday school with a smile through her toughest years. To be called dead weight by the man her daughter married felt like a robbery, not just of her pride, but of the love she'd invested in her family. David's voice dipped, but the door's thin opening carried his next line. "Redfin's got homes nearby at $650,000 0 cents. If we can just get her to sign over the house." He tapered off, but the intent landed like a punch. Claire's soft mumble, too quiet to catch, but there, locked in the betrayal. Margaret's heart clenched, not from surgery, but from the pain of seeing her daughter fade into someone she didn't know, just steps away. The door eased open, and Claire stepped in, gripping a paper cup of decaf coffee. Her smile was forced, the kind she'd flashed since she was a kid to dodge awkward moments. "Hey, Mom, got you some decaf," she said, her voice too perky, her eyes flicking to the monitors instead of meeting Margaret's. David trailed behind, phone in hand, thumb swiping. "Redfin, a Redfin listing, investment opportunity," in bold. Her stomach twisted, but she kept her expression blank. "Thanks, hun," she murmured, her voice rough but steady. Claire fussed with the blanket at Margaret's feet, a move that felt more routine than caring. David tossed out a half-hearted, "You're a tough old bird, huh?" his grin empty. Margaret gave a faint smile, her mind already racing past their fake concern. They left soon after, the door clicking shut, and the room's quiet wrapped her like armor. Margaret let out a shaky breath, her trembling hands steadying as clarity overtook pain. She'd spent decades building a life. Her cozy brick house, the pension she'd guarded, the savings she'd set aside for Claire's future. Now, David saw it as a jackpot, and Claire's silence made her an accomplice. The ache in Margaret's chest wasn't from surgery. It was the weight of a love turned sour, a bond unraveling. She lay still for hours, the machines tracking time she refused to squander. Her mind worked fast, piecing together a plan rooted not in revenge, but in self-preservation. She wasn't just a mom or a widow. She was a woman who'd clawed her way through loss, and she wasn't about to stop now. That night, after visiting hours, Tanya slipped in, her presence a soft comfort. A nurse with steady hands and a warmth that felt genuine. Tanya moved with the care of someone who'd watched too many patients fade alone. She tweaked Margaret's IV, her short braids swaying as she adjusted the oxygen line. Margaret eyed her name tag, Tanya L.R.N., and saw real kindness in her gaze. Not the fake stuff, but the kind that stayed when no one was looking. Margaret's voice, hoarse from disuse, broke the quiet. "Can you get a notary here?" she asked, her tone firm despite her weakness. Tanya paused, setting down her clipboard, her eyes locking with Margaret's in a moment of shared understanding. "Yes, ma'am," she said quietly. "I can make that happen. What's it for?" Margaret didn't answer right away. She looked past Tanya to the window, where a dim streetlight glowed through the blinds. "I need to make sure my choices stay mine," she said at last. Tanya nodded, no prying, just a silent vow to help. The idea had been simmering for months. David's offhand digs about her money at a summer cookout had sparked unease, prompting Margaret to call her lawyer, Ellen Carter, in a moment of quiet worry. "Draft a new trust, just in case," she'd told Ellen. "Something to lock down what's mine if they show their true colors." Ellen, a no-nonsense attorney who'd managed Margaret's affairs since her husband's death, had drawn up 2 wills, one that included Claire, another that cut her out. Margaret had hoped she'd never need the second. But David's hallway talk proved her instincts right. She wasn't just safeguarding her money, she was guarding her pride, her freedom, her right to choose who got her legacy. As Tanya left to arrange the notary, Margaret closed her eyes, not to rest, but to sharpen her focus. The hospital room, with its machine hums and bare walls, felt like a war zone now, and she was gearing up. David and Claire thought her weak, a fading figure they could outlast. They didn't know the fire forged from losing a husband, raising a kid alone, and fighting battles nobody saw. She'd taught Claire to stand tall, but somewhere along the way, Claire had picked David's greed over her mom's love. Margaret's jaw tightened. She wouldn't let them tear down her life while she still had air in her lungs. The hospital's harsh lights buzzed overhead, but Margaret's focus was razor sharp. Her chest, still sore from surgery, throbbed with each breath, but the pain took a back seat to the clarity driving her. Tanya's visit last night had been a game changer. When Margaret asked for a notary, Tanya's calm, no questions asked response had been a lifeline. "I need to make sure my choices stay mine," Margaret had said, and Tanya's nod felt like a pat. As the night shift bled into early morning, Margaret stayed awake, her mind mapping out the next steps. She'd built a life over decades. Her snug brick house, the pension she'd stretched thin, the savings meant for Claire's future. David's scheming in the hallway, caught through the door's gap, had shattered any hope that Claire would honor that legacy. Margaret wasn't just fighting for her stuff. She was fighting for her right to decide who deserved it. With Tanya's help, Margaret texted Ellen Carter at 4 a.m., her fingers slow but sure on the phone's tiny screen. "Send the trust revision. Overnight it. No name on the label," she typed, her words clear despite the post-surgery haze. Ellen, who'd been her rock since her husband passed, had seen this coming. Months back, after David's careless talk about her money at a family barbecue, Margaret had told Ellen to draft 2 wills. One with Claire, the second, once just a backup, was now her lifeline. Ellen texted back fast. "Packet's on its way by noon. Notary set for 1 p.m. Rest till then." Margaret set the phone down, her pulse even, not from peace, but from purpose. This wasn't about getting even. It was about staying alive. Tanya came back at dawn, her presence a steady comfort. She checked Margaret's IV, tweaked the oxygen mask, and gave a small smile at the untouched fruit cup. "You hanging in there?" she asked, her voice gentle but straight. Margaret nodded, her eyes meeting Tanya's. "I'm doing what I gotta do," she said, her scratchy voice carrying a grit Tanya understood. Notary's lined up, Tanya said, setting down her clipboard. I'll make sure the package gets to you quietly. Margaret's lips twitched, a spark of gratitude. Tanya wasn't just a nurse. She was a partner in this quiet revolt against betrayal. By noon, the hospital room felt less like a trap and more like a turning point. Claire and David showed up, their voices fake cheery, toting a thermos of chicken noodle soup. "Mom, thought you'd like something homemade," Claire said, her smile as flimsy as the hospital blanket. David stood by the bed's end, arms crossed, his phone stashed, but his eyes antsy. "Eat it while it's hot," he added, his tone too laid back. Margaret eased herself up, wincing as the stitches pulled, but her gaze held firm. "That's sweet," she mumbled, stirring the soup without tasting it. Claire sat on a chair, hands twitchy. "We were thinking," she started, "maybe we should update your bank accounts now. For the mortgage, the car. Less hassle for you." David nodded, his kindness rehearsed. "Just to keep things smooth in case anything goes down." Margaret's spoon froze mid-air. The heart monitor's steady beep filled the thick air. "I'm still kicking," she said, voice calm but cutting. David scratched his neck, smile fading. Claire laughed too quickly. "Just planning ahead, Mom." Margaret sipped her soup. It turned bitter in her throat. "Planning," she echoed, eyes locked on David's too long. They left soon after, Claire's kiss a habit, David's wave dismissive. Alone again, Margaret exhaled. Silence was her ally. At 12:30, a nurse's aide slipped in, dropping a padded mailer beside Margaret's pillow. "Private paperwork," she said, unaware of its weight. Margaret waited for quiet, then opened it. Inside, thick cream-colored pages, flag tab, signature lines, and a capped pen. Everything ready. Ellen's note was brief. "All set. Notary confirmed." Margaret stared, not afraid, just struck by how easily a life could be rewritten. A sparrow landed on the windowsill, a soft reminder that time moved forward. Her hands trembled, not from illness, but resolve. That house had been her sanctuary after her husband died. Claire grew up there. Now David saw it as cash, and Claire's silence spoke volumes. The new will changed everything. 80% to a senior center's art fund, 20% to scholarships for single moms. No mention of Claire or David. At 1 p.m., Tanya returned with a notary, a composed woman in gray. "Updating your estate?" she asked gently. Margaret nodded. "I am." Tanya stayed close. Each signature was deliberate, proof Margaret's mind was sharp. When finished, the notary filed the papers. Margaret handed the pen back to Tanya, who asked softly, "You sure?" Margaret met her gaze. "I'm sure." The next morning, the room smelled faintly of old soup. Margaret, propped up, felt a strange lightness. Not relief, but reclaimed control. An email from Ellen pinged. "Trust filed. Expect pushback." Margaret nodded to herself. Tanya had become more than a nurse. She was a witness to Margaret's quiet strength. Claire and David returned after lunch, their demeanor heavy. Claire's eyes were red, phone clutched tightly. David lingered behind, arms folded. "Care to explain?" Claire demanded, flashing her phone with Ellen's formal notice. "You raced us," her voice cracked. Margaret didn't need glasses to understand. "I heard everything," she said. "You called me dead weight. I wasn't asleep." David's voice turned cold. "You're not thinking clearly. Pain meds. This could get tossed." Margaret readied a reply, but Tanya entered with perfect timing. "Cognitive tests cleared pre-op," she said calmly. "No meds until 12 hours post-op, the chart's clear." David stiffened, rattled by her calm authority. Claire blinked, her hands shaking as she gripped her phone. "Mom, why would you do this?" she asked, her voice softer, almost begging. Margaret's gaze shifted to her daughter, the girl she'd raised through late nights and scraped knees, now a stranger next to a man who saw her as a cash machine. "You didn't ask," Margaret said. Her words not harsh but honest. You didn't ask what I needed, what I wanted. You stood there while he priced my house on Redfin, Claire. You picked silence. Claire's face fell, but she held Margaret's gaze, her quiet now in admission. David, unfazed, stood taller, his voice louder. We'll fight this, Margaret. Courts don't like bitter old ladies cutting out their kids. Margaret tilted her head, her face unyielding. You fought me in that hallway. She said, this is what you got. The room went quiet. The heart monitors beeped, the only sound breaking the tension. Claire's eyes flicked to David, looking for a cue. But he was already on his phone, probably hunting for legal tips. Margaret's chest hurt, not from surgery, but from the grief of losing her daughter to this version of herself. She'd hoped, maybe naively, that Claire would push back, choose her over David's greed. But that hallway moment showed a truth Margaret couldn't ignore. Claire's loyalty wasn't hers anymore. Tanya stood still, her chart a shield, her presence a reminder that Margaret wasn't alone. Unless you're her next of kin, Tanya said to David, her voice calm but firm, I'd suggest you clear out. David opened his mouth, then shut it, his confidence cracking under Tanya's steel. He grabbed Claire's arm, muttering, this ain't done. And they stormed out, the door slamming behind them. Margaret let out a breath, her hands steady now, the shake of betrayal replaced by focus. Tanya set the chart down, her eyes meeting Margaret's with a silent check-in. You okay? She asked. Margaret nodded, her voice soft but sure. I'm more than okay. I'm free. Tanya's lips curved into a small smile, and she adjusted Margaret's cannula with the same care she'd shown all week. You're tougher than they realize, she said, then stepped out to continue her rounds. Alone again, Margaret looked out the window, yesterday's sparrow gone, a faint breeze stirring the blinds. The hospital's buzz felt far off now, her focus inward. She'd signed away her house, her savings, her husband's pension, not out of spite, but to protect what mattered. Her pride, her choices, her legacy. Ellen called that afternoon, her voice steady but urgent. They're already talking to a lawyer, she said. David's pushing to contest the will, saying you were coerced. We've got the hospital records, the notary video, and Tanya's statement. They've got nothing. Margaret listened, her fingers tracing the bedsheet's edge. Let him try, she said, her tone ironclad. I've got nothing left to lose. Ellen paused, then said, you've got everything to win. Rest up, we'll handle it. Margaret hung up, her eyes on the cold, congealed soup, a symbol of the love she'd once poured into her family. Claire and David thought they could outlast her, that her age and illness would make her soft. They didn't get the strength of a woman who'd survived loss and rebuilt herself, time and again. With Tanya's backup and Ellen's smarts, Margaret had drawn a line they couldn't cross. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in days, she felt the weight of her own power. Margaret's hospital room, once a war zone of betrayal, had become a monument to her reclaimed strength. The clash with Claire and David, triggered by their discovery of her new will, had exposed their greed and her resolve. David's threat to fight the will, calling her a bitter old lady, and Claire's teary silence had only solidified Margaret's stance. With Tanya's unwavering support and Ellen's airtight prep hospital records, a notary video, cognitive tests, Margaret held her ground. The air, thick with the echo of their slammed door, now carried a new burden, the certainty of a legal showdown. As discharge loomed, Margaret faced not just a fight over her estate, but a deeper battle. To let go of the family she'd loved and find peace in a redefined life. Her path wasn't about clinging anymore, but about releasing what didn't serve her, with a quiet strength that would carry her forward. The hospital's sterile buzz faded as discharge day neared, the nasal cannula gone, her breath steadier despite the surgery's lingering ache. The new will, redirecting her house and savings to a senior center and a scholarship fund, was locked in with the county, a legal stronghold built on Ellen's skill and Tanya's witnessing. But David's last words, "This ain't done, hung like a dark cloud. Margaret knew their challenge was coming, a desperate grab for the $650,000 0 cents house they'd scoped on Redfin while she was hooked to machines. Sitting by the window, her silver hair catching the morning sun, she texted Ellen. "What's next?" Ellen's reply was quick. "They've filed a petition claiming delirium and coercion. We'll hit back with everything: video, records, witnesses. Mediation's next week." Margaret nodded, her fingers calm. She wasn't scared. She was ready. Claire and David's legal move landed in a thick envelope dropped off at the hospital the day before discharge. Their lawyer's petition was cold. Claimant asserts Margaret Thompson was mentally incapacitated at the time of will revision due to post-separative delirium, narcotic influence, and coercion by third parties. The words were formal, but their aim was brutal, painting Margaret as a dazed senior swayed by Tanya. She read it at her bedside, the heart monitor long gone, replaced by the soft shuffle of pages. Her tea sat cold. Ellen called right away. "This is bluffing," she said, her voice steady but firm. "We've got the surgeon's sign-off, the notary video where you laid out your intent, and Tanya's word. They're hoping you'll cave." Margaret's answer was short. "I won't." Discharge day brought a false calm. The room, cleared of monitors, felt like a stage reset for the next scene. Claire texted at 8 a.m. "We're downstairs. David's got the car. Can't wait to bring you home." Home felt like a baited hook, tied to their assumption they still owned her life. Margaret eyed the message, then set her phone aside. She dressed in soft slacks and a cardigan, her moves slow but firm, skipping the flimsy discharge gown. Tanya rolled in with a cart, pausing at Margaret's packed bag. "Ready?" she asked, her eyes warm. "Been ready since he called me dead weight," Margaret said, her voice solid. Tanya unplugged the cart, fixed Margaret's collar with the same care she'd given her IVs, and left to alert the nurses' station. Outside, Claire and David lingered in the lobby, bickering over parking fees, blind to the white transport van pulling up at the cardiac wing's private exit. Margaret stepped out, leaning on a single cane, her back straight, her eyes unflinching. Tanya walked beside her, holding discharge papers. Claire frowned, spotting the van. "Why'd they call a ride? We said we'd take her." Margaret didn't reply. Instead, she pulled a sealed envelope from her purse, labeled in sharp ink. "Final property disclosure." She handed it to David. "Open it now," she said. "I'm not going with you." David ripped it open, his face draining as he read the notarized deeds and trust papers. "You put the house in an irrevocable trust?" he sputtered. "It's filed with the county," Margaret said, adjusting her shawl. "It's the community centers now, for folks who care about more than property values." Claire flipped through the papers, her hands unsteady. "This is for real?" she whispered. Margaret's voice was even, deliberate. "I didn't give it away. I gave it to people who know my name without checking Redfin." Davy's voice broke with panic. "You've been played. That nurse—" He jabbed a finger at Tanya, who stood quietly at the nurse's station. Margaret stepped forward, her cane tapping the tile. "Don't you dare talk about her," she said, her tone cutting. "She held my hand while you were pricing my floors. That's worth more than your last name." David's words faltered, and Claire stood still, the paper slipping in her hands. Margaret climbed into the van, the driver closing the door with a soft thud. As it drove off, she didn't look back. The mediation a week later was a plain conference room, its calm a sharp contrast to the raw emotions inside. Margaret arrived with Ellen, her slim folder of documents, trust deeds, cognitive tests, timestamps, a legal arsenal. Claire and David sat across, joined by their lawyer, a guy with shiny shoes and a bored look. The mediator, a weary woman with a steady voice, kicked things off. "We're here to discuss resolving the challenge to Margaret Thompson's updated will." David's lawyer leaned in, harping on Margaret's surgery and supposed delirium. Ellen fired back smoothly. She was cleared by 2 evaluations backed by hospital video and timestamps proving she was sharp. Margaret opened her folder, sliding across trust forms, her CPA license, a notarized timeline. Claire's face went white. David scoffed. "Papers don't replace family," he said. Margaret's voice was quiet, precise. "Families shouldn't need legal proof to act decent." The mediator floated a settlement, a one-time payout to drop the case. Margaret shook her head. "No deals," she said. "They're not asking for fairness, they're asking for control." Claire shoved her chair back, eyes wet, but stayed quiet. David's lawyer kept at it, but Ellen's evidence, hospital records, the notary video, was bulletproof. Margaret's gaze drifted to the window, the Chicago skyline faint in the distance. She'd fought for Claire her whole life, but this fight was for herself. The mediation wrapped up without a deal, but Margaret knew the court would back her will. She left the room lighter, not from winning, but from letting go. Of a daughter who'd chosen greed, of a house that no longer held her heart. Days later, Margaret settled into a small condo by Lake Michigan, its windows framing waves that didn't demand her past. The house, now fully the community center's, was gone, but so was the pain of Claire's betrayal. She unpacked a couple of framed photos, some books, and an orchid, enough for a fresh start. Tanya's words stuck with her. "You're tougher than they realize." Margaret smiled. The lake's murmur, her new friend. The legal fight was over, but the real win was moving on from a daughter who'd picked greed, from a home that no longer felt like hers. Margaret's new condo by Lake Michigan was a peaceful retreat, its waves washing away the echoes of her legal battle. The showdown with Claire and David, their failed bid to overturn her will, and the final transfer of her home to a senior community center had freed her from their grasp. With Tanya's steady support and Ellen's sharp work, Margaret had secured her legacy, 80% to community art programs, 20% to scholarships for single moms. Now, in her quiet home, she faced the last step, healing from betrayal and embracing a legacy built on kindness, not conflict. One evening, Tanya stopped by, her blue scrubs swapped for a sweater, her eyes warm as ever. Over chamomile tea, she shared a story that hit Margaret hard. "My mom passed from cancer 3 years back," Tanya said, her voice low. "I wasn't there, missed her by hours. Seeing you alone, I couldn't let another daughter lose that chance." Margaret's throat tightened. Tanya's care, from fixing IVs to standing by her will, had been a mix of grief and grace. "You carried my pride," Margaret said, sliding an envelope across the table. Inside, a deed to a small fund for Tanya's future. "This isn't a reward, it's gratitude." Tanya's eyes shone, her hand shaking as she took it. "No one's believed in me like this," she whispered. Margaret smiled. "Sure. It's about time someone did." Days later, a card came from the community center, thanking Margaret for her gift. "Your strength inspires us," it read, signed by staff and seniors whose art classes would now flourish. Another letter arrived from a scholarship recipient, a single mom starting nursing school. "I'll carry your legacy into every room," she wrote. Margaret set both on her mantle, next to a faded photo of Claire at 6, gripping sidewalk chalk. The mix, past and future, felt right. She'd loved Claire fiercely, but love didn't mean owing her. Claire's last text, "We know where we stand," went unanswered. Margaret had offered lunch, one last shot, but Claire chose silence, just like in the hospital hallway. Outside, the lake glowed under a fading sun, its rhythm a reminder that time marched on. Margaret stepped onto her porch, barefoot on worn wood, and whispered, "I didn't give away a house. I built a home for those who need it." A bird landed nearby, tilting its head like it agreed. Her phone buzzed, a voicemail from a local paper wanting to share her story. Margaret paused, then smiled. "Let him tell it," she said to the wave. This wasn't payback, it was grace. Her legacy, woven into scholarships and safe spaces, would outlast her pain. carried by women like Tanya, who knew its worth.